Hello guys, welcome to my channel. And today I will clarify an American parody dream film called Click. Released in 2006. This movie got 6.4 out of 10 on Internet Movie Database, and 34% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So, do not wasting your time. Let's begin. The film begins as we see the primary hero, Michael Newman, who is a modeler by calling. He lives with his group of 4, which incorporate his significant other Donna, and 2 kids, Ben and Samantha. Michael's blundering supervisor John Ammer makes him work more than needed, and accordingly, Michael frequently winds up disregarding his family. Regardless of this, Michael tracks down a ton of satisfaction out of the brief period he will enjoy with his youngsters, like when he watches Dragon Tales with them prior to leaving for work. One day at work, John offers Michael a once-in-a-lifetime amazing chance to plan an extravagance for a Japanese aggregate. He likewise guarantees Michael an advancement if he can seal the agreement. Michael is thrilled by the suggestion, yet figures it out that he needs to go setting up camp with his family. Afterward, he additionally misses Ben's swimming race. At the point when Michael arrives at the school, he is welcomed by Ben's swimming educator Bill, with whom Ben appears to have a decent companionship. He in a split second becomes desirous as he is not ready to invest a lot of energy with his child. Consequently, he ridicules Bill's red Speedo. As the family assembles at the 4th of July firecrackers, Michael invests all his energy in the telephone with his chief, which starts to disturb Michael's mom Trudy. She whines that Michael will pass on right on time on the off chance that he proceeds to exhaust and eat low-quality nourishment. As Michael is involved on the telephone, his dad Ted engages the children with his quarter stunt. Intrigued by the stunt, Ben and Samantha ask their granddad how he figured out how to twist the coin, yet Ted reacts that an entertainer never uncovers his privileged insights. Ted further adds that even the enormous kid, Michael, has not had the option to interpret his mysterious. Later at home, a contention emits when Michael advises Donna to defer the setting up camp excursion. He at last quiets her down and starts his project research by watching an Asian design narrative. Be that as it may, he harms himself when he inadvertently botches Ben's helicopter remote for the television remote. Worn out on continually stirring up the controllers, Michael takes off to the grocery store to purchase an all-inclusive controller. Michael enters the retail location Bed Bath & Beyond. He searches wherever for the remote yet does not track down it. A drained Michael then, at that point, implodes on a bed. At the point when he pivots, he detects a segment of the store called Past. At the point when he gets inside to assess, he is invited by a baffling man named Morty. Michael starts to clarify about his circumstance to Morty, who then, at that point, takes Michael to a huge distribution center called Far Past. Morty then, at that point, gets an unusual-looking remote and offers it to Michael free of charge. Morty lets Michael know that the remote will program itself when he focuses and taps the buttons. A confounded Michael asks why he is being given the remote for nothing, to which Morty reacts that heroes need a break each every so often. As Michael plans to leave, he is likewise told that the thing is non-refundable. After Michael arrives at home, he keeps observing the narrative and starts chipping away at the project plan. Be that as it may, he is before long upset by his canine Sundance. The poor doggo needs a break outside, so he keeps on woofing. An incensed Michael then, at that point, focuses the remote at Sundance and presses the volume down button over and over, while yelling at the canine to remain quiet for 5 minutes. Amazingly, the canine becomes quiet. However, Michael excuses it as he might suspect it's simply a fantasy. After Michael takes Sundance out, he begins getting baffled again as the canine takes truly long to track down a spot to mitigate himself. So he focuses the remote at the canine once more, while squeezing quick forward. Very much like the last time, the stunt works, as the remote fast-tracks Sundance, who rapidly completes his work and gets back inside. Michael is shocked, lastly accepts the force of the all-inclusive remote. He discovers that the remote can be utilized to control reality. The next day, Michael utilizes the remote to investigate his previous existence. He gets passionate when he sees his little self play football with his companions at Lake Winnipesaukee. In the interim, Morty gives Michael his telephone number in the event that he has any inquiries regarding the remote. Michael utilizes the remote to quick advance through family supper, contentions and even intercourse. After quick sending the intercourse, Michael is astounded to discover that he peaked rapidly, and could not joy Donna like he regularly used to. He additionally discovers that he does not recollect the discussions he had or responsibilities he made during the supper. Michael calls Morty, and requests a clarification for it. Morty says that during quick forward, his body is on autopilot. This implies that he is making a half-hearted effort of regular day-to-day existence, however his brain skirts ahead. Thusly, while Michael appears to carry on with the ordinary life, he does not recollect any of it. After this disclosure, Michael utilizes the remote to quick advance through unwanted things like ailment, cold showers, and traffic. He likewise presents the plan he made on autopilot mode to the Japanese finance manager, Mr. Watsuhita. The gathering is by all accounts going incredible, yet, Michael's over-energized supervisor John unexpectedly taunts Japan's notable baseball players, mixing up their name for Asian dishes. This prompts Mr. Watsuhita to pardon himself, also have a private discussion with his group. An anxious Michael attempts to catch Watsuhita's discussion, yet, cannot see any of it. Along these lines, he utilizes the remote to interpret their discussion into English, and turn up their volume. The stunt works, and it uncovers that the Japanese group loathed Michael's configuration, remarking that it probably been made in the wake of observing an awful narrative on Asian engineering. They needed more rooms to amplify their benefits, furthermore not a dumb stream in the anteroom. Mr. Watsuhita then, at that point, orders his group to end the gathering so they can have jello shots at America's most prominent social accomplishment, TGI Fridays. Be that as it may, when Mr. Watsuhita approaches Michael to wrap up, he utilizes the caught discussion to prevail upon the money manager. He tears his bombed plan, and offers to make another one to fuse more rooms to boost benefits. A charmed Mr. Watsuhita at long last awards the agreement to Michael's organization. Later at home, a very thrilled Michael purchases presents for his significant other and youngsters. At the point when Donna asks about the justification behind Michael's satisfaction, he uncovers that John has advanced him to an organization. Donna hops in fervor. Nonetheless, the fervor transforms into frustration the following day, when Michael discovers that he has not been advanced. Actually, he will not be advanced until he readies the development plan for the inn, and gets Mr. Watsuhita's responsibility, which will take him a while. Crushed by the news, Michael utilizes the remote to stop John, and fart in his mouth. In the following scene, Michael anticipates utilizing the remote to quick advance to the time he completes the Watsuhita project. At the point when he looks for Morty's recommendation, Morty reminds Michael about the leprechaun from an oat commercial. The leprechaun generally pursues a treasure toward the finish of the rainbow, however when he at long last arrives, he understands it is simply cornflakes. Michael does not comprehend the allegory in any case, by the by suspends his arrangements to utilize the remote. At home, Michael is as yet baffled over his advancement and takes it out on his kids. The children begin crying when Michael makes fun of their pizza and pickles. He then, at that point, has a contention with Donna. Afterward, Michael understands his mix-up. He is irritated by his activities, so he at long last chooses to utilize the remote to skirt ahead to his advancement, and ends up at his advancement party. He discovers that it took John an entire year to advance him. During this time, Donna and Michael's relations begun to get stressed and they entered marriage directing. Ben and Samantha have developed and no more watch the Dragon Stories animation. He likewise discovers that Sundance has died. Michael separates and laments not letting his late canine mound his leg. This befuddles Donna, yet she reassures him at any rate. Michael guarantees Donna that he will change, furthermore come out better as a person for her. He requests that she not leave him. Michael and Donna make out, however the remote consequently quick advances to the furthest limit of the intercourse. Michael again observes an unsatisfied Donna lying close to him on bed. He is confounded by the remote naturally skipping time without him squeezing any buttons. He then, at that point, contacts Morty, who uncovers that the remote is currently utilizing its memory to execute Michael's inclinations. That is Google ways somewhat radical. Michael quick sent through a whole year, what's more that represented a great deal of intercourse skipped. Presently each time he has a go at engaging in sexual relations, or then again includes in occasions like showering, driving through traffic, contending, and being wiped out, the remote will quick advance on its own. Hearing this, Michael laments having ever utilized the remote and returns the remote to Morty, yet it consequently returns in his hand. He then, at that point, makes a few endeavors to dispose of what's more annihilate the remote, yet it returns each time. The following day, Michael goes to office on a bike without showering so he can stay away from the time being consequently quick sent. There, John informs him regarding his arrangements to resign, also travel to Morocco. John's retirement would make Michael the new top of the international division at the firm. While Michael is dazed by his advancement to such a high post, John shouts that each account Michael has chipped away at has transformed into gold. John likewise remarks that that would not shock him in the least, assuming one day Michael wound up being their organization's chief. Abruptly, Michael is quick sent 10 years into the future, where he is affluent, yet beefy beyond belief. He rapidly gets back to track down that Ben and Samantha are grown-up young people. Ben also has turned into a stout person similar as himself, while Samantha has begun dating somebody. He likewise discovers that Donna has separated from him, what's more is dating Ben's swimming educator Bill. Incensed by their relationship, Michael assaults Bill. A contention results, and the family canine leaps on Michael, making him thump his head on the divider, and fall oblivious. Following 6 difficult years, Michael at last gains awareness. Donna is there close by, who uncovers that after he went into a state of insensibility, a cat filter found disease in his body, so he needed to go through treatment for quite a long time. In the wake of pulsating disease, he had a coronary episode as well. In any case, Michael is as of now not fat, accordingly of having gone through liposuction to save his life. Later at the firm, Michael meets a grown-up Ben, who has shockingly lost a great deal of weight working out with Donna's better half Bill. Michael offers to take Ben, Samantha, and their grandparents out for a frozen yogurt, yet Ben uncovers that Granddad Ted has as of now passed on. This obliterates Michael, who breaks into tears, what's more visits Ted's grave. Michael then, at that point, utilizes the remote to re-experience at the point when he last saw his father. Michael sees that Ted dropped by his office, what's more proposed to take Ben and him out for supper. In any case, an autopilot Michael dismissed the deal without checking out the elderly person. Ted proceeded to demand and propose to show Michael his cherished youth quarter stunt in any case, and upset Michael hollered at his dad, while uncovering that he had consistently known the mystery to the stunt. The helpless elderly person then, at that point, apologized, and left with tears in his eyes. Michael gets loaded up with disgrace and culpability. Morty then, at that point, shows up and apologizes for taking his dad away, conceding that he is the holy messenger of death. Michael becomes irate by the disclosure and assaults Morty. Notwithstanding, Morty vanishes like a phantom and returns behind him. Terrified, Michael requests that the remote take him to a great spot, whereupon the remote quick advances him a few additional years in the future to Ben's wedding. At the wedding, Michael is thrilled to see his mother, and gives her a long kiss. He additionally meets an all-developed-up Samantha. Michael hears her referring to Bill as father, and experiences a respiratory failure, unfit to bear the aggravation of being supplanted even as a dad. He wakes in the medical clinic that evening with Ben, also Samantha, close by. Before Ben and Samantha are accompanied out by the medical caretaker, Michael discovers that Ben is skipping his wedding trip as a result of an agreement. Expecting that Ben may mess up the same way he made, Michael assembles the remainder of his solidarity to follow them out of the clinic. Nonetheless, his body gives out and he falls onto the ground, with his family around him. In an extremely soft tone, he recommends Ben to consistently put family first, and apologizes to Samantha for not being there for her. Michael then, at that point, lets Donna know that he will forever love her and passes away. Abruptly, Michael stirs in Bed Bath & Beyond. He is happy to discover that everything was simply a fantasy. Outside, he is excited to see his bad, average, working class vehicle. After he arrives at home, he accepts his family also vows to invest more energy with them. All at once, he then, at that point, finds the remote on the counter alongside a note from Morty, which says that he has been allowed a subsequent opportunity, as heroes need a break. Morty likewise trusts that Michael will do the right thing this time. The film closes as Michael tosses the remote in the junk and gets pleased as this time, it doesn't return. So guys, would you like this video, or not? Comment in comment section. And if you want to watch more videos like this, then do not forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you.